Well, good afternoon. Our statements, we will begin the section. Our statements expressed by Fundação Getúlio Vargas employees and guests in our online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their opinions and not necessarily FGV institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here agreed to participate in this event of their all free will, and they consented to be recorded in this broadcast, which will be posted later on FGV official channels. Now I will do this in Portuguese. As manifestações expressas por integrantes dos quadros da Fundação Getúlio Vargas e por convidados que participam dos eventos e transmissões online representam exclusivamente as opiniões dos seus autores e não necessariamente a posição institucional da FGV. Reiteramos também que todos aqui presentes concordarem em participar desse evento de forma espontânea e com isso autorizo o uso da sua imagem para essa transmissão que ficará disponível posteriormente nos canais oficiais da FGV. Então, assim, acho que a gente pode começar. Obrigada a todos, boa sessão. Good session.
So I think that Lidia can present now. Please.
Okay, so can you hear me well? Yep, and the slides? Okay, perfect. So today I'm going to present my work about gender gaps in the labor market and pension sustainability. So let me start with the motivation and the methodology for this paper. So the increase in female workforce participation is a stabilized fact in all developed countries, and Spain has not been an exception to this. However, from this plot, we can see two main differences. So first, the female workforce participation in Spain started from a point in which women were underrepresented in the labor market in comparison to other countries like the United States, OECD countries, and Europe. And the second thing that we can see from this plot is this catch-up effect over time, okay? So this phenomena, the increase in female workforce participation of women, has been broadly studied in the literature, and I like to divide the literature in two parts. So we have these papers talking about this documentation for many countries like US, Spain, and then we have the papers talking about the potential explanations for the rise, like the decrease in fertility, the increase in educational attainment, and so on and so forth. However, the literature has not analyzed which are the consequences for the government finances. And thus my research question is the following. What is the contribution of women labor force participation increase on the sustainability of pensions in Spain? So you may wonder, okay, but why is it relevant? So let me tell you that the sustainability of public pensions has been a matter of constant concern in recent decades, and Social Security represents a big share of the Spanish government finances, around 11% of GDP in 2019. The pension system consists of a pay-as-you-go system, so it is financed by a payroll tax on labor earnings, and the main drivers for this not sustainability of the pension system are mainly the aging population and the educational transition. But female labor outcomes are important, and they have been neglected by the literature. By female labor market outcomes, I mean that women are getting more educated than men. Female workforce participation has increased for all levels of education. There has been a decline in fertility, as well as a postponement of births, and women are even living longer than men. So in this paper, I show that all these outcomes play a relevant role in the Spanish pension system. And moreover, this paper could be applied to other countries like the United States. Let me tell you here that it is not a quantitative exercise. because with the results of my paper, I can inform about the effects of different gender equalizing policies on the public finances. And in particular, in this paper, I try to answer these two. First, is the gender-based taxation a promising policy to reduce gender difference in the labor market? I will talk to that in a few slides. And what about the introduction of a social security that will tax men and women differently in order to balance each budget? So for that, I need the model in order to take into consideration this substitutability of labor force for men whenever women enter in the labor market. And just to give you an idea, in Spain, there is still a room for these policies that target to narrow this gender difference in the labor market because we have persistent gender gaps in employment rate, in the share of part-time jobs, as well as in the wage gap. So what do I do in this paper? I'm going to build a life cycle model of two-member households with husbands and wives that are going to make decisions on labor supply, consumption, and savings. I will calibrate the model to an initial steady state in 1975, and then I model this increase in female labor force participation up to today, which is year 2019. I will quantify which are the implications of this increase for pensions and contributions, and I make different counterfactual analysis as well as welfare analysis. And the main result, so the main takeaway for this presentation today is that there is an important redistribution of resources from women to men in Spain between 1975 and 2019. Around, in 2020, women finance around 10% of men's pensions once they have already financed their own pensions, okay? So let me go very briefly to the model. I have here an overlapping generations model, and it is an unitary model. So I'm going to have a small open economy with perfect capital markets with married households who are not going to divorce, and they make decisions, as I told you before, on consumption, savings, and labor supply. And I have a government that collects social security contributions and pays pensions. And in this model, I have two kinds of pensions: retirement pensions and widow pensions. The sources of heterogeneity are diverse. Households at each point in time, they differ on age, the spouse's educational attainment, the spouse's initial wages, lifetime horizon of the husband and the wife, and the number of children and babies. Babies are important because in this model, they are costly in two dimensions. So in time and in out-of-pocket money. And women at the beginning of time, they make a participation cost in the labor market. So they draw kappa from a distribution and they decide whether they want to make this career choice. So they want to be in the labor market, so to form a two-earner household, or they want to be out of the labor market and work at home, okay? Let me go to the baseline transition. So in the baseline transition, we can see this plot in which in the left-hand side axis, I have the old age dependency ratio, which is telling us the ratio of pensioners over contributors. And we can see that this old age dependency ratio is expected to rise up until 2050. And whenever the baby boomers pass away, it drops, but it remains high. And the main reason for that are two. First, life expectancy is expected to be very high in the long run, as well as fertility is expected to be very low in the long run. This is why the old age dependency ratio remains high. And in the right-hand side axis, I have social security contributions rate. So in this model, I asked the government to balance the budget each period. So in order to balance the budget, whenever we have a lot of pensioners, social security contributions need to increase around 22 percentage points until 2050, and it remains 17 percentage points higher in the long run. With this, I make a decomposition exercise by gender. In this plot, we can see that until 2050, men's pensions were higher than men's contributions to the Social Security. In other words, men were not able to, or are not able to finance their own pensions. However, the opposite occurs for women. Women are able to finance their own pensions. So just to keep in mind this, back in the 70s, the employment rate of married women was very low and few married women were entitled to retirement pensions. However, nowadays, there has been a huge increase in the employment rate, implying that women are going to contribute to the Social Security. However, still 31% of pensioners were female, and therefore the main consequence for this is that we have a redistribution of resources from women to men. And I compute this redistribution of resources with this gender imbalance ratio. This is telling me what is the share of male pensioners financed by women once they have already financed their own pensions, both retirement and widow pensions. And this plot is telling us, the results are telling us that women finance around 10% of male pensions, and it drops after 2020, and it's almost positive until 2050. And after this point in time, the opposite occurs. Just it's a computational matter. In the long run, now men finance 10% of women pensions. I think that in the short run should be clear. However, what is happening in the long run? In the long run, it is true that women have entered into the labor market. Nevertheless, there are persistent gender gaps in the labor market regarding average working hours, gross earnings, as well as Social Security contributions. So I think that this plot is quite clear. After 2050, we can see that the gender gap in pensions is lower than the gender gap in Social Security contributions, implying that even though women had increased their participation to the labor market, they are not able to finance their own pensions. With this, today I'm going to talk about gender-based taxation. Okay. Basically, this policy experiment is motivated by a great literature about how do we tax optimally individuals, and it's based on a paper, very well-known paper of Alcine et al. That shows that the government should tax less intensively individuals who have a more elastic labor supply, and in this setting, it means women. So given the fact that gender-based policies are usually implemented in the European Court, I introduced in 2019 this experiment. So I say, the government will announce in this time that women and men are going to be taxed at a different rate. So in particular, I've chosen that the tax path for women is 20% below the sequence of taxes, the one that we've seen before of the benchmark economy. So with
Lidia, sorry to interrupt. Can you see the chat? You
Oh.
have 4 minutes left.
Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. So with this, we can see that this is the Social Security contributions rate for women, that this is exogenous, okay? And this is the one implied by the model in order to balance the budget. With this, women are going to work more, on average 2 hours more per week, while men, since their contributions rate is higher, they are going to supply around 1 hour less of work per week. In this experiment, this redistribution of resources from women to men are going to disappear and gender gaps are going to drop. So this is a promising policy because we can see that average working hours, gross earnings, participation, and average retirement pensions, the gender gaps, I mean, will drop. But what about the welfare analysis? Is it the same? So we've seen that gender gaps are going to be reduced, but what happens with welfare? So I introduced consumption equivalence scale in which I check whether this is good or not for individuals, and I have two different results. So in 2019, whenever the policy is introduced, there are generalized welfare losses, and this is given by the fact that women are not able to choose again whether they want to be on a two-earner or a one-earner households. They are stick to that choice. However, for newborn cohorts, we have generalized welfare gains around 0.7% in lifetime consumption, and it drops over the years until, let's say, 0.55. With this, female employment rate will also increase for newborn cohorts. So let me try to conclude and summarize the two main results that I've shown you today. First, women are crucial to sustain the Spanish pension system, and we need to take this into account. By 2020, they finance around 10% of males' pensions, and this is true, this positive compensation, until 2050. And taxing women at a permanently lower rate, I've shown you that it shortened gender difference in the labor market regarding participation, earnings, and retirement pensions. And we have these generalized welfare gains in consumption compensation for newborn cohorts. So that was my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Lidia. I believe that Jocelyn is not here. I'm not sure, but maybe we can open for discussion with other participants, or we can proceed. How do you prefer?
As you want. If you want to continue with the presentations and we wait until the end.
I think we can wait, yeah, because maybe she will arrive. I think I will proceed to, I think that is Diana's presentation now.
Okay, it's fine.
Can you see my presentation? Let me click here. Now, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning.
Diana, would you prefer to warn you by voice or by chat, the time?
Can you tell me when I have 5 minutes left?
Perfect.
I'm absolutely dysphonic, so I think I will keep my presentation 10 minutes because I'm not sure my voice will allow me to do more. Okay, my name is Diana Suarez. I'm from General Sarmiento National University in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The paper I want to present you today, it's titled The Gender Gap in Public Science and Technology Funding, the Matilda Effect in STEM Disciplines in Argentina. Is part of a larger IDB project. We are trying to measure the gender gap in STEM disciplines and how this impact over time and how this evolve over time. What I want to present you today is one part of this project, which has the motivation of moving towards prospective analysis to close the gender gap. We know about the gender gap. I don't need to say it here, but now we need to discover some tools to provide policy criteria to close the gender gap, to avoid generating from the beginning. So we will analyze different sources of the gender gap in Argentina on STEM fields, public funding for science and technology. We have, in this case, 3 research questions. I will explain each one here because I think it's important to understand the different moments where the gender gap can take place. So we first analyze if women are less likely to obtain a research award the first time they apply. So we look at women and men applying to this fund. I will talk a bit about the fund in a few slides. The first time they decide to submit a project. The second research question is about if women are less likely to gain the first award. So we check what happened the first time they are awarded. And the last question is about the Matthew effect of science. Are women less likely to recurrently be awarded with research grants? So we look at women that were already granted and look at the differential probabilities between women and men. Our database, it's composed by two types of records. First is the PCT records. This is an Argentinian line of funding. And then we use Scopus database to gather information about academic backgrounds. The result is an unbalanced dynamic panel at the level of researcher and year of presentation. It's about 5,000 researchers and 11,000 observations for the period 2010-2015. We have information about researchers' participation, scientific production, academic achievements, and biographic information. The PCT in Spanish, Proyectos de Investigación Científica y Tecnológica, Science and Technology Research Projects, that's the acronym. This is the most important line of funding in Argentina. It's very competitive. It's not well funded, but it's one of the largest funds you can be awarded with in Argentina. It's the main line of funding with a federal scope. They are matching and competitive grants open to all researchers from science and technology institutions, public and private ones. The fund has high levels of recurrence. On average, every researcher has been awarded 3 times during the period under analysis. Again, even though the amount is very short, it's around between $10,000 and $50,000, but it's the most important one, so it's very prestigious to be awarded with the PCT. And this allowed you to apply to other funds and to use it in your CV as one of the main funds you've been awarded with. Why STEM? Because they are very important fields of science in terms of technology and innovation. These fields are proved to have a high impact on the innovation rate in the countries, and of course in terms of technological development. Argentina is a very egalitarian country in terms of women researchers' participation. At the general level, at the aggregate level, is around 53% of the total population of researchers. But in STEM fields, we are only 38% of total researchers at the national level and based on national records. So why we decided to combine these two sources, STEM and PCT? First of all, because projects categorized under STEM disciplines are 70% of total funded projects in PCT. The rate awards to submission in projects led up by men is 57%, even though women represent half of the population of researchers. When the project is led by women, this rate drops up to 47%. So in general terms, on average, we have a gap in terms of how many women access to this fund. To look into our 3 research questions, we build a probit model for panel data to study the probability of researcher A working on the J field to be awarded with the PCT, and we include a dummy variable. There you have it's if the director of the project is a woman or not. And to test research question, look at research questions 2 and 3. We use the same probit model, but in this case, we add a lag-dependent variable if the researcher was awarded before, and if this researcher is a woman or a man. Our results. We test, again, 3 research questions, and we call them entrance barriers, participation barriers, and recurrence barriers. In terms of the first time a researcher applies, female researchers have 3.8 lower probabilities of being awarded the first time they apply. So this is the first gender gap we found in PCT on STEM fields. at any time, asking for this fund at any time, regardless how many times women apply. More or less, you have to apply twice on average to be awarded with the PCT. That's the average rate for the whole line of funding. The second research question was about participation barriers, showed that female researchers have, again, 3.8 lower probabilities of being awarded the first time they apply. And we have no evidence, however, of the Matilda effect or the Matthew effect in the case of women. That's the absence of a gender gap in recurrent access to the program. So we found some sort of sticky floor when you apply the first time and on being awarded the first time. However, once you move up in the career, we found no evidence of recurrency, of a gender gap in recurrency access in recurrent access to the funds. So what about implications of the research? Of course, you can look at all the tables and all the econometric in the paper. I decided not to present all the implications, all the results here because of the time, but I would like to stress the implications of these results. First of all, science is not neutral because this provides evidence about the fact that it is based on discriminatory and sexist practices that bias knowledge. Evaluations of these funds are proved to have a gap in terms of how women and men are evaluated. The second one, this PACET Day is an horizontal program, so not having an agenda means having a biased agenda. Horizontal programs reinforce gender bias on science. And therefore, we need to mainstream in the gender perspective during the whole process of knowledge creation. This implies moving into new forms of line of funding, discriminated women versus men, but also to look at the evaluation process and how reviewers are formed or trained in a gender perspective. I think that's all. I'm losing my voice now. So here you have my contact details. And of course, I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I will share my screen because I have prepared some slides to discuss your paper.
I have stopped sharing screen.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just a minute. Oh, sorry. So I was really pleased to read Diana and Call first papers. It was really interesting. In this paper, I quickly summarized the paper, but as Diana just presented, I think I will skip. I was would like to say that I really enjoyed it because I didn't know this literature. So it was interesting to learn about the Matthew and Matilda effects. And also I would like to say that I was really curious if we could have access to the similar data here in Brazil to look at gender gaps in research funding here in Brazil. So it was a really interesting data set. And then I will skip to my questions. Most of them are like clarifications. Maybe you don't have the available data, but I was wondering anyway. The first question is how does the gender composition of eligible research compare with the gender composition of applicants? In the paper, you say that women represent like 53% of the scientific community in Argentina, and then they are like 45% of applicants. So maybe we can see underrepresentation, if I am interpreting correctly, or no, the pool of eligible researchers is not comparable. But I would like to see this discussion and maybe think how this relates to gender differences in willingness to compete. It's an interesting discussion. Also, another question that I have, are women less persistent? are they less likely to apply again once they receive a rejection? Here in Brazil, we have a working paper, and I think that Loris and Paulo are here, and they are co-authors in this paper. And we see that in Brazilian National Conference in Economics, once they receive a rejection, they are less likely to apply again, so to submit another paper. So it's an interesting finding that we have here. So that's why I was wondering that. And I think that you can look at that in your data. Also, another question that I had is if you can assess the academic results of the research grants. So in the long term, do they lead to patents and publications or high quality publications? Because I think that there is a KGE paper from David Carr, Patricia Funk, Olivari, from 2020, that they see that at least in the in top academic paper journals in economics, the referees set higher standards for women. So when you compare a paper published by women to a paper published by men, you see that paper published by women have higher number of citations and have a good quality in terms of quality of the writing. So I think that would be interesting to see if the research grants that were awarded to women had different results. And I think that the last bullet point, you don't have the available data, but it's an interesting analysis also. If you could see the gender composition of the referees and compare if the gender matching of the referees and the researchers influence the results. And also if you can see the gender composition of the research teams. I think that you can only observe the leading researcher, but it would be interesting because we see that many times while men are not hurt by co-authorship, women are, they don't receive the same credit. So it would be also an interesting analysis. But I would like to congratulate, I really enjoyed reading the paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruna. I don't know if you want me to respond now or just we wait until the end of the presentations.
I think that we have time. So if you want to answer now.
Your first question, well, thank you for your comment. I would like if you can send me your PPT, it would be great. I think there are very interesting questions to continue this research. The legible population, in fact, we have a selection bias in this sample because it's proved that only the best women and men apply to PCT. It's such a competitive fund that you have to reach several standards before you even think of applying to PCT. For instance, all the team members have to have a PhD to be part of a PCT, regardless you are a team leader or not. And then the number of publications and your academic background. There are also certain limits, certain age limits. So there is another problem with when applying to PCT. So we know we are working with the best researchers in terms of academic backgrounds for both men and women. I don't know if women are more or less persistent in terms of applying. I will check at this. I think it's a very interesting question. It could also explain some of the bias, the gender bias in the results. We are working just now, right now, in terms of the impact of PCT in the academic performance and academic results. We use Scopus data to control for academic background, not to check impact. We are working now on this part of the evaluation process of the process. Gender composition of the referees. I am working also. Mariano, part of the team, is working on impact. I'm working on evaluation. I could access the scores of the evaluation. So now I can look at the evaluation in terms of the project and in terms of the academic background. So, so far I found some sort of gender gap in terms of the evaluation of the project, not the academic background. Once you control academic performance, the gap disappears. And this gap is non-existent among young researchers, but it appears among elders or older researchers. So there is some sort of glass ceiling at the top of the pyramid. And in this case, again, the gap is in the evaluation of the project. So with this information, I'm going to interview the reviewers. The reviewers are, the pool of reviewers is quite balanced because it represents the distribution of the researchers at the national level. In fact, I will risk to say that there are more women than men among the reviewers, especially in social and humanitarian science. Of course, women are underrepresented among STEM fields. But we are working right now in terms of the bias, the unconscious bias in the evaluation. So I hope I will have more information for the next conference. I know I cannot access the research team. That's a huge problem with this database. We are working very close with the PACET managers in order to gather this information and to compile this information. But so far it's kind of impossible because it's a huge Excel, impossible to transform into a database. So thank you for your comments. I see there is on value received by researchers with an show that women also ask for less. Yes, women ask for less resources than men. We can access information on the value of the score received for each researcher. So I think it would be, Paula, it would be very interesting to share some results and to see how comparable our data is. And yes, women ask for less money and they are gathered with less money. They are awarded with less money in these PACET projects. Yes, no, I don't have a working paper because I need to be approved by the authorities before publishing anything. This is just internal information. We hope we'll have at least a working paper in a few months.
Thanks, Diana. I think that Jocelyn is not here, so maybe I should present.
I have a question for Lidia. I don't know if you want me to ask.
I think that you can ask the question.
Thank you, Lilia. I enjoyed very much your model, how you look at this thing over time. This is one of the limitations we have with our data, to look over time how the gap evolved. We are trying to build some models, so I'm going to read carefully your paper. I have one question. I don't know in Spain, but in Argentina, half of marriage are going to get divorced. So I wonder how sensible is your model to this condition of being a two-person household?
Yeah, in Spain, the same happens. So the divorce is super common and it has been increasing over time, over the last years in particular. So it's not sensible to that. So it is, no, in the other way around. It's super sensible to that. So I just have an answer for married couples who are always married over time. But that's an important thing to take into account for a future model, a more complicated one with the divorce inside and this bargaining power and all these things, but not in the, I don't have an answer for that in this model, but it could be great for sure.
Thank you.
I think that I can present, or if anyone has a question to Diana or Lidia, then you can ask, and then I present. Okay, so I think I will go on. Can you see my screen? Okay. So, hi, good afternoon. The paper that I will present today is co-authored with Professor Fernanda and Professor from São Paulo School of Economics and Professor Louis-Philippe from the University of Ottawa. We have slightly altered the title since the program, so I'm sorry about the confusion. So the main question that we want to answer in our paper is, are there gender differences in reaction to an increase in exam mistakes? And we do this analysis in a really competitive environment. And as the answer is yes, we find gender difference, we are also investigating a lot of mechanisms that could drive the effects. We use data from Unicam admission exam. I think that maybe, as we have people that are not from Brazil, I will explain a little bit. Unicam is a large university, and it's a university that is really research intense and prestigious, so the admission exam is quite competitive. And we use this admission data to verify how the gender performance gap changes in parts of the exam that have a higher weight, so when the stakes are higher. I will try to really enter in details about the Unicam admission exam, that I think that it's the main point of our empirical strategy. We use data from Unicam from 2000 and to 2004, that is the period previous to the affirmative action policies that could confound somehow our impacts, as they can alter incentives, or they also can even modify the gender composition of each major. So Unicamp has two stages, the admission exam. In the first exam, only a few 30% of the students qualify to the second stage, that we will call phase one survivors. For this phase one survivors, they will answer exactly the same exams, both in the first stage and in the second stage. In the phase one, all subjects carry the same weight. So each applicant will answer two questions on 6 subjects plus write an essay. The first stage will last only 1 day. In phase 2, although all applicants have to write the same exam, depending on the major that you choose, you have 1 or 2 priority subjects that will receive a weight of 2 instead of 1. So these subjects will have a higher weight. So the stakes are higher for some subjects. And we use that in our analysis. In phase 2, they will answer exams on the same subjects, plus exams in Portuguese and a foreign language, but they don't have to write an essay. And they have 12 questions per subject, and it will last 4 days. I brought this figure to illustrate the Unicamp admission exam. So as I told you, in phase 1, you have an essay, plus 2 questions per subject on biology, chemistry, history, geography, physics, and maths. In the second stage, that lasts 4 days, you have 12 questions per subject on the same subjects, plus Portuguese and English. Here's an example how it would work for medicine applicants. So for medicine applicants, they will have the same weight in all subjects in the first phase, but in the second stage, they will have a higher weight on biology and chemistry, that are the so-called priority subjects. So stakes are higher for medicine applicants on those subjects. As we would like to control for subject specific ability, we will use the subjects that we can see in both stages. So we will focus on those 6 subjects, and we will not use data on Portuguese and English. However, as a robustness check, we use the essay score as a proxy for phase 1 score in Portuguese, and we find really similar results. So some advantages of the Unicamp setting, we can observe all applicants taking exactly the same exam, just changing the time and same timing, same format, same content, just changing the weight that each applicant has on the exam. We can control, as we see, 6 observations per applicant. As we follow then in 6 subjects, we have more than 1 observation per person, and then we can control for individual fixed facts, and we also use phase 1 score to control for subject specific ability. As I told you, that is a really competitive environment, and we can rule out the possibility that it's not optimal to provide efforts, because as phase 1 will define who qualifies for the second stage, and all exams will count toward the final score. They will put an effort, at least some effort in all exams. And also another advantage of Unicam setting is that we observe each performance on each question, that the applicant answers. So we can investigate a lot of the potential channels that could explain our results. So I'm not sure whether you can see, but here I didn't bring the econometric model in the interest of time, but I will try to briefly explain here. So the dependent variable are phase 2 normalized subject specific scores. Here we have a female dummy. The priority dummy varies according to the major choice, and to each applicant we'll have 1 or 2 subjects. And our main coefficient of interest are the female priority interaction term. We control for enhanced scores that are end of high school exams that we consider a proxy of overall ability. And we control for a bunch of fixed effects. So we control for subject fixed effects, subject gender fixed effects, individual fixed effects, as well as we flexibly control for relative performance in phase 1 in each subject, and interaction terms of the relative performance in an N, and phase 1 scores with the priority dummy. So I think that I will briefly talk about the first column, and then I will jump to our preferred specification, that is column 6. In the first column, we see that although women outperform, controlling for enhanced scores, outperforming men at Unicam exam, the advantage disappears at the priority subjects, that are the subjects that are worth more. Once we control for all the stuff and eliminate the potential biases, we see that women are still with a lower performance in priority subjects. So they have a 6% of standard deviation, lower performance in the priority subjects, which represents 9% of our within applicant standard deviation. Here we are analyzing whether these gender difference in reaction to an increasing stakes differs by subject, and we see that although we do not observe a result significant impact for biology and chemistry, we see large effects for geography, history, mathematics, and physics. So we see that women underperform in all these subjects, and also we include Portuguese, we see similar results also. Another interesting finding is that the results are even larger for women that have high ability. So for the average woman, the results are similar to the one that I just presented. So they underperform 6% of standard deviation lower in priority subjects, but for women that are have a higher performance in an A, 1 standard deviation higher, the gender gap in priority subjects represents 9% of a standard deviation. So we try to analyze potential channels that could explain our results. The evidence suggests 2 potential mechanisms: perfectionism or diligence, and self-confidence. We can rule out a lot. I didn't bring here also in the interest of time, but I can detail more if you want me to, but we can rule out a lot of other hypotheses, such as gender-specific selection into priority subjects, mental fatigue or time management issues, gender difference in response to difficult questions or negative shocks, women lacking information about the exams rules, or women choking under pressure. So about perfectionism, we see that women have a higher number of perfect scores in the subjects that are weightless, that the non-priority subjects, although they have a lower number of perfect scores in the priority subjects. Perfect scores is the number of questions that they received a maximum score. So here we can say that women may be putting more effort than they should in questions that are worth less. Also, another finding that we have is that in the priority subjects, women omit more questions, although they condition on attempting to answer the question, they receive a lower number of zero scores. So maybe they are focusing in some question and skipping others. And finally, we also see, we look at the coefficient of variation across subjects in phase 2, and we see that women allocated far more equally, so they have more similar scores in all subjects. And finally, the results on omissions and zero scores, we could interpret also as a lack of self-confidence. So we ask, do female applicants do not try to answer the question they are not sure of the correct answer? Or maybe the opposite, are maybe men overconfident and they will always assume that they know a little bit and try to answer the question? And as I haven't said, I have forgotten, but Unicamp, at Unicamp admission exam, all questions are open response. There are no multiple choice tests. So if the applicant does not know the answer, guessing could lead to a waste of time. So maybe it's not optimal to answer if you don't know the answer. So maybe if the candidate thinks that she does not know, she should skip the item. So this could explain our results also. So just to conclude, women decrease their performance relative to men in high stakes questions. This does not seem to be related to choke under pressure, lower comparative advantage, less information about Unicamp rules, male procrastination, mental fatigue, or time management problems. We have some evidence that this could be explained by perfectionism or lower levels of self-confidence. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruna. Can I go on with my comments?
Yes, okay. Please.
It was a very interesting paper. I really enjoyed reading it, even though I wasn't happy about the results, but it was a very interesting paper. And I like how you approach such rich information you have. I would like to start my comments from the end of the paper, where you summarize your main findings, and you have just summarizing them here in your last slides. So you say, increasing stakes decreases females' performance, especially in higher ability applicants. Female performance increases more relative to males on difficult questions and questions that appear late in the exam. And then the conclusion is, taking together the pieces of evidence suggest that gender difference in perfectionism and self-confidence can explain our findings. So I will put on my academic glasses, and I must say that it's a very robust paper in the sense of the findings it provides and how you check and test every possible situation of endogeneity, selection bias, and unobservable characteristics of individuals. In that sense, I really enjoyed the methodological aspect of your paper and how it can be used to test other situations different from this one you are interpreting and analyzing. So I strongly recommend to submit this paper to a journal. I checked if you have published some sort of this paper in any way, and you didn't. Really, right?
No, not
Okay,
yet, but we are almost.
Yes, I think you should try to publish. I must stress try to, because it's very difficult to publish these type of papers. I mean, gender papers, unless you are applying to gender studies to give this discussion in a regular journal and standard journal in the field research policy, science and public policy, you for sure will get a rejection because it's not an issue for this field. But even though I encourage you to publish the paper, in that sense, I think I would suggest to shorten the paper. It's really long. I mean, you have a lot of information that you can put available under request, but not to publish the robustness checks and the genetic check and all that. I think you have at least 3 papers, one about gender and results in the 2 tests, another about gender and the subject. I think that's a really interesting aspect of your research, looking deeply into each subject of the test. And the last paper I think you have there is about gender and trajectories from the NM test. I don't know how to say that in Portuguese, but the first test or the last test they gave NM. So the trajectories from NM up to the second test in Campinas. So I wonder, and this is my question, why you claim that what make women underperform in the exam is a matter of perfectionism. I have doubts about that conclusion, because it's not clearly a result, but a conclusion and interpretation of your results. Why women decide to pay less attention to the most important questions in terms of the weight, so they call them perfectionists. Perfectionists should apply to all questions, and in that sense, I'm not sure why perfectionism you use to characterize these results. It's a matter of time. Do men manage time better than women, so women don't have enough time to complete all the questions? And are they kind of silly because they do not complete first the questions with higher stakes? And why self-confidence? Evidence shows that women are less risky in their behaviors, but on the average level, you are looking at those that perform the best since they passed the first exam. So you have the best women in your sample. And comparable evidence tends to show that shorter gender gap exists at the top of the pyramid. Since the top of the pyramid, women tend to be better on average term than men. So why do you think it's a problem of self-confidence? I mean, once women reach the top of the pyramid, they tend to be better and very self-confident. So why this conclusion? But in any case, it's a very robust paper. These are questions beyond the scope of the paper. It's just an interpretation of your results. Finally, your data is almost 20 years old. I think that could be a problem in the terms of publication, because 20 years is a lot of time in terms of the feminism movements. A lot of things have happened in the last 20 years. So I wonder how this data could be changing or is changing, given the affirmative actions and quotas and so on. And finally, I put now my policymaker glasses and wonder how to modify that reality you found in your paper. What will be the policy conclusion, recommendation derived from your results? Does positive discrimination make help in any way? How the examination process should be modified in order to avoid this difference? Because I think most of the difference had to do with things that happened before reaching the examination situation, during secondary school, during primary school. So how to change this reality from policy? What type of policies should be implemented to close this gender gap you found? Well, in any case, as you see, I enjoyed reading the paper and read it carefully because I found it very interesting and very helpful to understand how women ended the university, and in this case, Unicam. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Diana. I really like the comments. I think that the main question that we have are the mechanisms. So we are just interpreting, and we would like feedbacks really valuable to us because we are trying to interpret our finds and look at the mechanisms. I think that the perfectionism or diligence, we think as because they have like more similar scores across subjects. So maybe they are trying to do their best in all subjects and not focusing on the priority subjects that they should. That's why we argue that we can call it perfectionism or diligence, but maybe it's not what we are observing. And the self-confidence, we think about this omission I think that it's most related to they omit more than men. So we think that this somehow shows that they only answer when they are completely sure. That's why we interpret self-confidence, but you are quite sure. We are looking at a really selected women. From phase 1 to phase 2, only 30% of the applicants will pass. So we are looking at women that have good performance under competition. So it's hard to understand really why we still observe these results even for the selected sample. Let me remember the other questions. Just a minute. I have forgotten to write it down.
Don't worry. My other question was about policy recommendations.
Policy recommendations. We are thinking about trying to somehow, but we are not, it's still in the beginning, try to understand whether women are taking the optimal strategy for them. Maybe they have like a higher knowledge in all subjects. Maybe they, even though they don't focus on the priority subjects, they are more likely to get admission in at the university. So we are trying to understand how this female strategy of not focusing on the priority subjects leads to gender difference in the admission rates. Then I think we can understand better the policy implications about it. I think, did I answer all the questions? Sorry. And I think that Thais asked about bias in correction. We would like to test also the referees or the people that correct the questions. They don't know, it's anonymous, but I think that you can assume that because of the open response questions that this belongs to a man or to a woman. So it's possible that there is some kind of bias in correction, but we cannot have this information. We cannot assess that. I think that Jocelyn is here now, so maybe it's her time to present.
I am very sorry, but I misplaced the time. I thought it was 3 p.m. Chilean time. I don't know why. I'm like my head is on the moon, and I just arrived, and it happened. This started like an hour before, so I'm very, very sorry. Really, I just entered and realized that you were presenting, so I apologize to Lidia. I was supposed to comment her paper. I'm really sorry, Lidia. I will send you my comments on written on the paper, so I apologize. So I don't know, you're the chair, Bruna, if I can present, or maybe I can just do it later. It's my fault, really. I am very sorry.
No, you can present, and if you want to discuss Lidia paper also, it's perfect.
Okay,
go ahead.
I don't want to mismanage. I mean, I know that there's just a little time left, so I'll just hurry with my presentation at least. It's this, let me just share my, this, okay. Let me go into Zoom here. I think, yes, this is okay. Can you see their presentation? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna present this paper, which was co-authored together with Mariano Pereira. This is this paper is part of a research project conducted in 2020 by the Inter-American Development Bank. Actually, Diana probably presented the same paper, it's the case of Argentina. And the aim of this project was to analyze the existence, the causes, and the impacts of gender gaps in the allocation of research funds that are granted through a competitive process, in a selection of Latin American countries. So Argentina was part of this, Colombia, and also Chile. So we observe a stylist fact is that women still remain underrepresented in key sectors of our society, namely in the political arena, plus in the economic sector, or in the social sectors as well, in different sectors, plus also in the academic sector. And of course, since we observe still this women underrepresentation in different sectors, this becomes an impediment to achieve sustainable development, as mentioned by the United Nations, through its sustainable development goal number 5 of gender equality. Plus, if women still remain underrepresented, particularly, for example, and which is a focus of our paper, in academia, we are losing talent, of course, especially if women are not represented adequately. We lose this kind of diversity component that enhances creativity, right, and innovativeness in the collective thinking. So addressing this gender gap, although it's not necessarily which is, but it goes further a matter of justice, right? It is it represents an economic cost for our society, and this also implies that in the area of academia, and in particular also in the STEM areas where this paper is focused, you are losing also diverse opinions and different ways to address problems that are relevant to the society, right? Now, this paper in particular really focuses in the academic sector, since there is an evidence of this leaky pipeline, right? In which women, probably Diana also explained this, we observe that in the academic sector, particularly in the STEM disciplines, you see that women enrollment, for example, in areas related to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are on average between 20, 30% around in OECD countries. Of course, there's some variation, but so you observe that all these cultural factors, gender stereotypes, the pressures of family, peers, and also the social and cultural context in which girls are embedded affect the decisions of girls going into a STEM-related university degree. Graduations are even less, and then you start seeing all this kind of losing women throughout their academic career, because then the women that pursue a graduate degree are even less, and ones that and those that decide to become a researcher, during this academic career, you start seeing less and less representation of women in the higher ranks, higher hierarchies of the academic career, plus less women making decisions in terms of research agendas or managing research funding. So there's still this this problem that we observe. So we focus on, particularly in this paper, on we want to know whether this underrepresentation or this less participation of women in research, maybe it has to do with the access of women to public funding for research in STEM fields. So we want to check whether there's evidence of this Matthew and Matilda effect that probably Diana explained before. So why STEM fields? Why do we focus on STEM fields? Because these are key scientific disciplines that contribute to socioeconomic development, right? We know that there's the Sustainable Development Goals, which require to provide innovative and effective solutions to multiple problems. And these disciplines of engineering and science, science-related, natural science-related research could contribute to the development of new technologies, new knowledge that could help to address this social problems. Plus, we know, as I mentioned before, we have a higher level of gender bias in terms of women performing in research. Plus, if we focus on developing economies, particularly in the Latin American context, we see that there's relatively less highly qualified human capital that is devoted to these areas, which are very important to promote the production of new knowledge and the development of new technologies, which are a key input to develop new innovations. Actually, Chile is a country that spends very little in research and development, and which is very little in terms of innovation. So there's a big challenge, and we want to try to include more people devoted to research that affects, at the end of the day, innovation. So we are not, we cannot afford to lose talent, and not also female talent in this regard. So our contribution with this research is basically we want to challenge the gender neutrality assumption behind the allocation of public research grants that are devoted to research activities. Typically, these policies are assumed that they are gender neutral. They are based on merit, right, on the quality of the proposal and in the performance of and productivity of the researcher. But actually, this is just a big assumption that there's gender neutrality. So given the best practices, the good practices of including a gender mainstreaming approach in public policies, we want to contribute by including this variable in the analysis of how research public grants are assigned into research. So this gender neutrality involves in policies, it involves the integration of the gender perspective into the preparation, the design, the implementation and monitoring of and also evaluation of policies, regulatory measures, and some other programs, with the aim of promoting gender equality between men and women. So this could be a good way, having a feedback on how these policies are performing. It is a good way to start addressing gender inequalities. Second, we want to provide new evidence on the possible sources of the Matthew and Matilda effect. There has been some evidence, so we want to know whether this is true also for a developing country like Chile. Plus, we want to contribute some conceptual and with some conceptual and methodological tools to integrate the gender perspective into public policies aimed at promoting scientific research. We propose
Jocelyn, sorry to interrupt, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So we propose 3 research questions. The first is, are women less likely than men to be awarded a research grant the first time that they submit a research project in a STEM field? So you apply for the first time, which is the probability that a man and a woman get granted this funding for the first time. We want to check whether the probability is different. The second research question is related to, are women less likely than men to be eventually awarded their first research grant in a STEM field after several application attempts? So whether if you apply periodically, whether the woman has a less probability to be awarded their first research grant after several application attempts. And the last one is regarding recurrence. Are women less likely to be recurrently awarded research grant once they have awarded ones? Do they have the same probability of being awarded a second research grant? So for this purpose, I think I'm going to skip the theoretical framework, which probably Diana also already mentioned this. So we want to check whether there is what explains this leaky pipeline. In particularly, we see that there's different causes that relate to the, for example, lower representation of women in seniority levels. There's also this stylist fact that women publish less. And we want to focus in particularly on the funding part, whether there is this Matthew effect and whether this Matilda effect holds, where the women tend to have a less probability of being awarded a research grant. For this purpose, we use administrative records from the main public agency that provides funding for research in Chile, which is the ANID program. We use a subsample of researchers that applied to 2 programs Fondesit in its initiation line, which is you can apply to this for the first time at the beginning of your academic career. It is granted to just to a person just one time in your academic career, and the regular problem, which is granted many times, and you can apply by yourself or with a small group of co-authors. We cover the period 2002 until 2009. We also include the FONDEF program, which is aimed more at applied research. We define STEM researchers in STEM if they applied, because you can apply many times. We consider a researcher in the STEM area if more than 50% of the projects that you applied belong to a STEM field. Okay, so within STEM areas, we have, of course, that we have around 5,000 researchers, 23% of them are women, and around 800 researchers in the FONDEF program, around 20% of them are women. So still you see that within STEM areas, women are underrepresented. So we combine this Fondesit records and FONDEF records of these grants with scientific publications that we retrieve from Scopus and Web of Science to build this unbalanced dynamic panel in which we have researchers times their year of application in the period 2000 until 2009. So we have information about their applications, their grants, the score that they obtained, and the discipline. We also have information if whether they are STEM or not researchers, their scientific productivity, their academic achievements, plus some extra demographic information. Some descriptive statistics that I'm gonna skip. This is what I told before. We have, for example, in terms of publications, we have that this productivity puzzle that we observe in which females, for example, publish relatively less than men, and they are also relatively less cited than men, which is part of what could be explaining less probability of being awarded a research grant. However, we control for this information. So the research question 1 is addressed through a probit model in which we want to check if the probability of being awarded the first research grant the first time that you apply differs between men and women. And the second research question, we estimate this dynamic panel data models in which we check whether you have a probability. We consider this variable in which you have if you were awarded a grant before. So and this interactive term in which we want to check whether if you are a woman and you have were granted a grant before, whether this differs between men and women. So this is our results for research question 1. Are women less likely to obtain research grants the first time that they submit a project? So we don't find evidence on that female receive are less likely to receive funding both in the initiation and regular problem. The same holds for FONDEF projects. Because this is a program which that assigns scores to the project, the quality of the project, and the quality of the quality of the researcher. We do not necessarily assume that there is no discrimination. At least if the thing is that the score explains everything, because you get a score and based on the score then you get accepted or not. However, we perceive that there could be some evidence on different scores, so we are not able to know whether women are assigned less score due to potential discrimination or not. So even though this is good news, once you are assigned the score because you're a woman, then you are not discriminated necessarily. And we find also not evidence in the FONDEF programs. Finally, on the second questions, are women less likely than men to be eventually granted their first research grant? We also do not find evidence on this regard. Plus, there's no evidence on recurrence, at least in Chile. So this is basically our preliminary results. This is what we got, and mainly this is basically because we have all this the score of the project. However, we are checking whether there could be some bias in regarding the assignment of the score of the project. So we are looking into this later. So thank you very much. Sorry for the time.
Thanks, Jocelyn. I think that we can open for questions, and then if we have time, we can discuss. Lidia can discuss yours, and then you can discuss Lidia's presentation.
Sorry, you want me to comment Lidia's presentation, or just get some questions?
Sorry, I was wondering whether all participants have questions, because if they don't have questions, then we can proceed to the discussion of Lidia's paper. Then you can discuss Lidia's papers. I think that Dolores and Paula have questions on the chat.
Sure. I have okay. And Diana, regarding the definition of STEM you used, did you include biological areas, for example? I noticed there are some variations in the literature. This is a question from Paula Carvalho. Actually, we have, within STEM, we consider natural sciences and fields that are related to engineering and technology, all this, but basically mathematics and all this, astronomy, but not biological sciences in STEM, at least in our case. Medical sciences, for example, those are different. They are included in the category of health sciences, but not in the area of natural sciences. So in my definition of STEM, this is not included. However, when you check the results, because we have made the same calculations for non-STEM areas, and we are still looking whether these results change with regarding STEM areas. Also, we found, I did not explain this, but we observed some biases, but before the year 2000, around the beginning of the 2000s, there was some evidence of gender gaps and gender discrimination, but it seems to have been, vanished in the latest years. Just in case. So we have information about discipline, so we can make some differences and some difference analysis according to the discipline, but things did not change dramatically. I don't know, Diana, you have, if you have.
No, it's the same for us, where the differences are the same in any science. We use the same definition as Jocelyn's paper to define STEM. And I'm connecting this with the response to, let me see, Paula also, I think, about the publication. The case of Argentina is going to be published next month. I think we have already passed all the evaluation stages in IDB. And there I didn't present it, but we analyze each letter within the STEM acronym. So differences are quite similar, although in science and technology are higher.
I can see another question here. Have you looked at what happened to economics? Not specifically into economics. The thing is that for us, it's a bit, we have at least a score. I don't know whether, I don't remember if you have, Diana, the score that is assigned to the project or not. We do have it, but the problem is that we get a score on the quality of the project and then on the quality of the researcher in terms of the productivity, and this very, they suppose the researcher's quality is very straightforward. Everybody knows how you're going to be assessed in terms of how many papers and how many citations. Within the program, you have different disciplines, and each discipline, we have 27 study groups in Fondesit, and according to the discipline, each discipline considers, for example, humanities and philosophy, they consider even more books. In economics, they consider more like WASP papers or Scopus. Even we consider mainly WASP papers. So you could assess this is actually quite a very objective, because you have papers, you get a score, and you know how much you're going to get. However, in the quality in the assessment of the quality of your proposal, there could be some bias on this if you are not in line with what they are of what the committee considers relevant or not. But the problem is that we don't have access to the different scores on the quality of the project and the quality of the researcher. We have mixed. So we have the score, but we don't know whether there is a bias in the score that is assigned to the quality of the paper. The results do not change much in social sciences, at least in the case of Chile, but there could be something on we want to check, but it's not possible to know whether women are systematically assigned less scores on the quality of their research project, because there could be some gender biases. Now, the assessment is done, how do you say, blind, in the latest year, to avoid possible biases against women on their research proposals. So, but in a new paper, I'm conducting a research for the Ministry of Science, and they are asked to check all different disciplines, and we're going to have a narrow look at different disciplines. So hopefully we'll come with some new insights on this regard. Also, did you check Paula asked, did you also check the age heterogeneity of the results? Are young researchers more penalized? Actually, what you find is that at the beginning, the age is not necessarily important. You would think that maybe younger researchers are more penalized, but that's not the case. You start in equal conditions, especially in the latest years, where women have been pursuing more and more graduate degrees. There's a program, at least in Chile, in which they were given scholarships to study abroad, and women had a participation. Actually, PhD degrees are comparable between women and men at the beginning of their career. At the beginning, they publish relatively the same, but you see that the gaps start emerging later afterwards. I've been conducting qualitative interviews, and you see that at least maternity is a problem, and then they start publishing systematically less throughout their academic career for different reasons. But you see that biases are not necessary. These gaps start emerging consistent with the leaky pipeline in later stages of the academic career, not necessarily at the beginning. They're relatively in equal conditions. Actually, the rate of research granted in the initiation program, which is the first time that you apply to this to a project on the beginning of your career, men are comparable to women, at least in Chile. You start seeing some differences later on. Was there another question? Did I miss something? Maria Dolores, you asked if I understand correctly, both works on gender differences in research funding is part of the same IDP project. Yes, it is. There's a provision for the publication of some material book of the project. Yes, all these papers are going to be published. Diana's paper, it was kind of the benchmark. So we followed their methodology. So they are in a later stage. They're about, as Diana mentioned, to publish. We started to build that data from scratch, so we're a bit behind. But eventually, these are all going to be published as research as working papers of the IDB, probably the case of Colombia as well. So there's going to be evidence of on this. And but I foresee, because I know that Argentina, there is some evidence on gender gaps. However, it seems there are no gender gaps, at least not in the last years, in the case of Chile, and not even in the FONDEF project, which is applied research, which you conduct in collaboration with some companies to pursue the application and commercial application of some of scientific research. We do not find as well a lot of not gender gaps, which is good news. However, this is not necessarily, we're still looking up at possible sources of possible bias, especially in the assignment of scores. So this is our presentation. I'll be happy to share our latest version later on once I write it, because I'm still writing it. So thank you. I think I'll send Lidia my comments written, because I have them written down. So I think that's the best, because I do not want to delay even further this. I apologize for me having all this mess up. So, but I will send you, Lidia, my comment. It was actually a really interesting paper. I mean, overall, I'm going to send it written, but this is very interesting, especially for some other systems, social security systems like the one that we have, not pay as you go, but the individual capitalization. So whether this could be a different setting, this could be very informative, especially for my country, at least Chile, which we are now in a big social turmoil because of this issue. So this is very interesting for public policies. So I'll send you my comments written down. Thank you everybody for listening.
I think we are on time, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.